You've done a few mic checks, I can tell. Okay, Jeffrey. Good. All right. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Jeff Clark, and I just want to thank everybody for coming here and carving time out of your busy lives for something that I think is super important. I want to thank Chuck for making time for us as well. I know that he's at that point in the campaign, running for Secretary of State, where we got 8 days till the primaries, and so these guys who don't have a lot of establishment money behind them are putting in 20-plus hour days, and so I'm very grateful for him to be coming up here to speak with us today and talk to us about what I think are some really critical things. So I just want to kind of frame this discussion. One of the things I want to say is that I think a lot of you probably know Chuck. He's been involved with state politics since 2017, I believe. But we are really at a kind of a critical juncture in our nation's history, as I think a lot of you know. So we are not just in a pickle, we are really at a precipice. And this is a time where really the powers of darkness, they know that the United States of America is really the last thing standing between us and the one world government that they so desperately want to see come in. And so they've really pulled out all the stakes to really try and make it happen. And so they're very intent on trying to snuff out the last beacon of freedom on earth. And I think a lot of you recognize that not only are the stakes high, but a lot of us were kind of shocked by what happened in the 2020 elections. Maybe not so much some of the shenanigans that happened. I think some of us were expecting that. But the thing that was really shocking to a lot of people that I know that kind of followed it closely was the fact that court after court was unwilling to hear any evidence of election irregularities and fraud. And then perhaps even more disheartening, we had a whole bunch of Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state and Republican legislators in swing states that were positioned to do something about this, just kind of cover it all up, right? So they were really trying to give the people the story that these are the cleanest, safest, most secure elections we've ever had. And then they put every barrier possible in place to make sure that we couldn't investigate, we couldn't get any answers to some legitimate concerns and questions. And so, I think the people, understandably, are not feeling confident in our election systems because that reaction is not one that creates confidence. It's one that makes people think there's a big cover-up, right? And so I know that when I first got involved with some election integrity groups, even the state of Wyoming, I think a lot of us were kind of going into it with this idea of, well, things are going to be different here. We have a really conservative state. There's a lot of good people that live here, and those of us who are interested in kind of looking into, at least some of the vulnerabilities around elections and trying to get answers to some of these things that they just wouldn't look into in the swing states. What we found is, they were happy, our political representatives, our Secretary of State, the different people, and we really covered the gamut in terms of trying to look for avenues where we could pursue this, express concerns, look into things, and consistently what we found was that people would just say, you know, trust us, the elections are clean, and then anytime we tried to pursue it further than that, you know, barriers would be put up, lawfare would come into play, a lot of people would kind of get canceled, censored, shut down, and so forth. And so that was disheartening because I think some of us felt like, well, you know, if people in the swing states have been bought off, maybe a state like Wyoming can kind of lead the way in a certain sense in terms of, for example, maybe looking into the machines and seeing, you know, there's a lot of concerns that have been brought up around those. There have been states like Michigan where there have been forensic evidence and there were votes that were switched and manipulated. And so we're like, well, maybe Wyoming can kind of lead the way and have an honest investigation into some of this stuff. But it just didn't happen. And so, as I kind of was involved with reaching out to many different representatives, Chuck was one of 3 out of 60 in the state legislature that actually stood up, and he said he thought the concerns were legitimate, he thought that they needed to be looked into. He was open to seeing if there was a way that the legislature could perhaps allocate funds to look into some of this stuff, and he even had the courage to sign on to Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers' letter, which is calling for legislative representatives across the country to basically say, hey, you know, we support forensic audits looking into any of the states where there's any kind of evidence of irregularities, voter fraud, manipulation of the systems that we count on to administer our elections. And so, needless to say, I think we're in a position because the nature of our constitutional republic is one where there's this premise that the voters and their elected representatives, they have the informed consent of the voters, and are expected in return to do the will of the people and to be accountable to the voters. But if the election systems are compromised, all of that is just messed up. And so, you know, one of the major steps for people who are invested in retaking our country back is putting people, godly men and women, who have high levels of integrity and the courage to fight the fight that needs to be fought for us to restore that election integrity to our systems. And as you know, that Secretary of State position is the one that oversees the election, so it is a super critical one, and we're very lucky to have someone like Chuck who's willing to kind of step up and say, hey, you know, I will put in the countless hours and the fundraising and the time, and really, you know, especially Christian conservatives who step into key electoral offices. I mean, the reality is that it's become a blood sport, so it's not about discussing kind of differences of policy and how we think this might be a better answer to particular problems that the people are having. It's become politics of personal distraction. So the establishment, media, the left, you know, they're just brutal, and they'll just try to destroy people's lives. They try to destroy them personally. And so it takes an awful lot of courage to step into that. But boy, do we need, you know, men and women of courage who are godly, who love our nation, and who are willing to stand up for and defend the Constitution to step into those positions. So grateful to him, glad that we have the opportunity to hear a little bit from him today, to ask some questions, to get him to know him better, and hopefully over the course of the evening, a lot of you are going to walk away feeling like you're not only willing to support him, but to be able to, grateful to be able to support someone like him for that Secretary of State position. Okay, so that was just kind of framing things a little bit. Before we get started with the rest of it, I would just like to see if Andy Patzik would start us out with a word of prayer. And Andy is running for city council. He's another courageous, godly man, so if you live in the city limits, I hope you will definitely consider voting for him.
Very much.
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for the time that we have this evening. Lord, thank you for our country. Thank you for our freedoms. Our freedoms are written down in the Constitution, Lord, but they came from you. So I appreciate that you gave those men, those forefathers of our country, the wisdom and the knowledge to set things off on such a great foot for us. And Lord, I just pray that you strengthen us and bolden us in the fight as we endeavor to keep what we had and restore what we've lost. I want to thank you for those men and women who are currently fighting. I want to thank you for the candidates who believe in the causes of freedom, and pray that you give them strength and endurance. And above all, Lord, your will be done. Be with our discussion tonight. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good to see you. Keep going. Come on.
Okay, and I'd like to ask my lovely wife Alicia if she would mind leading us in the Star Spangled Banner.
Would you include the second stanza? No, I'm serious. That's the one that talks about God.
I don't think I know.
We would love to if someone gets her the word.
I'm sorry, I don't have that great a memory. But the second stanza is all about God.
If I had it, I would sing it for you.
Let me look it up for you, perhaps.
Oh, let me not screw you up. Okay, let's stand up if you can, and you'll join us. We don't have a flag in the room, but we'll just imagine. Oh, say and you see by the dawn's early light was so proudly revealed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, sailors that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Okay, before I introduce Chuck, I just want to share a little bit of scripture with you because I think that it's really imperative if we are going to win this battle that we be able to step out on God's promises and that we step out in faith and obedience and trying to do the right thing. We want to hunger for truth and thirst for righteousness in this battle, and as we do, I think He will anoint us and empower us to be successful and victorious. So this scripture, many of you are familiar with, but it's certainly relevant. This is from 2 Chronicles, chapter 7, verse 14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Okay, so a little bit about Chuck Gray. So he began his career as a radio executive And he hosted a conservative radio show from 2013 to 2019. He served in the Wyoming House of Representatives since 2017. And he is a 5-time CPAC award winner for his consistent conservative voting record, you know. So I think one of the things about our system that is so maddening, honestly, is we have many people who come out and say they are going to stand for our values, stand for our principles, and to vote conservative. And, you know, really, these rhinos are people who are backed by the establishment. They get their money, they're compromised, they're corrupted, and they have no interest in doing what's right in the eyes of the people. And so we find ourselves being betrayed over and over and over again. But Chuck has a consistent conservative voting record. He has been someone who's really stood strong for both our First and Second Amendments. He is someone who's worked hard to protect our jobs in the energy sector. He's a pro-life champion who sponsored Wyoming's first ultrasound bill in 30 years. He also stopped funding of abortion, which had previously been part of the University of Wyoming student health care plan. So he was able to use a budget amendment to stop that. He's been awarded the Platinum Award, which is the Wyoming Right to Life's highest award for his work to protect the unborn. And he really has dedicated a lot of his adult life toward advancing conservative Christian values. He's been a leader in the state Senate to improve voter integrity. He was someone who was one of the leading sponsors of Wyoming's voter ID bills. And I mentioned how he was one of only 3 out of 60 legislators that we had contact with who was actually actively willing to try and address this problem and to come up with real solutions. So anyway, I have Chuck, is there anything that I missed out as far as your background that you want people to know about?
That's very generous. I'm ready to go.
Okay. So I have just a couple questions.
Yeah.
And then I want to give you your time to go.
Okay.
And then maybe we can just open it up for questions here.
Sure.
So people can kind of get a better understanding on where you stand on some of the issues that are most important to folks here. So one of my questions is, where do you think our greatest election vulnerabilities are, and what plans do you have as Secretary of State to address those?
Be careful, Jeff.
Okay.
They told me I could take this off. Thank you. I know this got set up kind of last minute here. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Chuck Gray. I want to thank Jeff and Andy for putting this together. It kind of came together in an interesting way. I got a call from Jeff who said he wanted to do a fundraiser, and then Andy also had an event that sort of was on Sundays, and we decided to combine it, and came together in 10 hours or so. And then Dr. Bird and Ronnie LeBlanc put together the venue. Dr. Bird, thank you. Ronnie, thank you. Thank you to... And I know they've hosted so many events here, so many candidates. I always apologize to Dr. Bird because I haven't been to one yet. And I'm just so glad at the end of this campaign, we're getting 9 days, we're able to do one here. I've always wanted to do an event here. I'm very excited. In answer to that question, we've been running on an election integrity agenda in our candidacy for Secretary of State. My main opponent, Tara Nethercott, says everything is fine. She wants to collect a $125,000 paycheck. I just saw on Wyoming Public Radio, and I don't follow them that much, but it was on my Twitter feed. She says the LLC filings, no changes needed, no improvements possible. I've never seen anyone run for a position with so little vision and so little message. And that's why you're seeing what you're seeing if you have the last few days with this defamatory attack. We just delivered a retraction letter to the media and to Tara Nethercott herself and to Max Maxfield, which is the first step in beginning defamation litigation. We'll get to that in a moment. in answer to your question, we've been running on an election integrity reform agenda. Number one, ban the ballot drop boxes. Thank you. 9 counties have them. 9 counties. We've been doing 2,000 mule screenings around the state.
Yeah.
And the first 2/3 of that film talks about why they are a problem.
Yeah.
There's no security. They're supposed to have video cameras on them. That's what I hear all the time. Well, somebody was either in on it, who was watching it, or not watching.
Yeah.
And we have 9 counties that have ununiform elections because, and one of the things that the Secretary of State has the ability to do in statute, and Tara said, well, Chuck, you don't have any ability to ban the ballot drop boxes. Only the legislature can. If you look in Wyoming statute, the reason Secretary of State oversees elections is a section in there that says that the Secretary of State is to maintain a uniform election. That goes to ballot design, but it also goes to this. These 9 counties that have these ballot drop boxes, it's not only on the Secretary of State to have the option, to have the power to do away with those. They have the duty to do away with those because state statute is very clear on the need for a uniform election. That's because we want a fair election. So we must ban the ballot drop boxes, which are a vehicle to the ballot harvesting. The second thing that we need to do is have all paper ballots.
Yes.
Thank you. And when I say paper ballots, because every time I do this, the clerks come up to me and they say, Chuck, we already have them. You know, everything I say, I'm a liar. The media and the insiders and the Democrats, that coalition. Because they don't have any ideas. So all they can do is make up stuff and say I'm a liar. But what I mean by a paper ballot is paper with pen to paper.
Yeah.
Not the touch screens that print something out in the belly of the machine that we don't know. Someone can mess with it. And no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am a trust but verify guy. And on something that's important, you want to reduce as much as possible the ability for fraud. And those touch screens are really problematic. Laramie County, which is 15% of the statewide count, even 16% in certain years, has moved all to the touchscreens. And most counties have them in their early voting centers. I've never voted with one because I don't vote early, but all I want, and I know most people here probably vote this way, is with pen to paper. And it's the same thing as the Dropbox issue, which is they are doing an ununiform election in Laramie County, and we can immediately, I mean, I'll probably be sued on it, but we'll fight them, and I think we'll win. We can just say that those are to be done away with. The third thing, where I think we have a vulnerability, and this previous one was a lead into this, is we need to have a hand audit of the county.
Yes.
And Jeff was talking about this in some of his introductory comments, which is the way that we can lead the nation in our elections and can help these other states where we have problems, but there are other states who are in deep trouble. So we can be on the forefront of leading on these issues. And one of the things the coalition, and it's a coalition, and it's around our country and in Wyoming, and I call it the coalition of the media, the insiders, those are the Republicans, in name only, with R's after their name, usually they're in leadership, and they're committee chairman, all those guys that, you know, like Barlow, if he told some of these guys to jump off the Grand Canyon, they might ask for a parachute, but they definitely do it. And that's the insider group. And then you got the Democrats. That's the coalition. And that coalition wants us to believe that there's no way to do a hand audit of the county. It's impossible. Their favorite word is can't. That's the biggest word I hear down in Cheyenne. Can't. Sometimes I wonder why they're there. Because within 3 days, at the start of the session, this group served in the legislature for 6 years. Every bill is, oh, we can't do that. We can't do voter ID, Chuck, which we got done. We can't say no to the federal government on the mandates. We can't say no to the federal funds. It's the same thing here. They tell us we can't do a hand audit of the count, even though France, the UK, and I'll tell you, there's a lot less brain power over there. Just look at their economic system, socialism. They do it. So we can do it here. We just need someone with a vision to get it done. So that's the third thing that is in our election integrity reform agenda. And that also is something that can be spearheaded by the Secretary of State's office without a change in statute. Then you get to the things that do require changes in statute. And we want a Secretary of State who's going to advocate to the legislature vigorously to get these things done. And these are all differences, by the way. My opponent said the drop boxes are fine. No problems, she has no issues with the paper ballots, no need for a hand audit. But let's get to the things we need to change in statute. We must ban the crossover voting. We must. This is another difference. Tara Nethercott voted against the bill to ban crossover voting. I've always voted for it, to ban crossover voting. Runoffs, another difference in this race, our voting record. And the banning of the Zuck bucks. If you've seen 2,000 Mules, about the final third transitions into how they paid the mules to gather these ballots. And it was Zuckerberg, his friends, Soros, all that big money, injecting hundreds of millions of dollars into our elections. We had a bill to ban that, and the coalition of the Democrats and insiders and the media stopped it. It's another thing we need to get done. We need to strengthen the voter ID law, which, here Carolyn and I, we worked really hard on that. I remember when Carolyn called me in 2019 after it got defeated again in session. Carolyn said, we're gonna keep working at it. We did. We got it done in 2021. There are some flaws in the bill, which we'll talk about a little later. It's part of why I'm running. I want to fix those. I drafted the bill and I saw the insiders weaken it with amendment after amendment on that floor. And that's another thing we need to strengthen. So that's a little bit of a rundown on your question. I would say those are the big things that I want to fix.
Okay, and just follow up to that question.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kind of leaders in the voter integrity group, Patriots, who've been really delving into this in a deep way, but two things that they really identify as huge vulnerabilities that need to be addressed are getting rid of the machines is one of the big ones that you're consistently hearing. And the other one is just the voter rolls are not updated in any kind of way where there's accuracy in terms of getting rid of people who have died, who have moved out of the area and so forth. And so what seems likely is that those who are highly invested in manipulating this whole system are aware of the people who have died, they're aware of the people who moved, they're aware of the people who rarely, if ever, vote, and so they have a certain number of potential people that they can inject into the system just because those roles haven't been carefully maintained. So I wondered if you could respond to those thoughts.
Yeah, clean voter rolls are pivotal. One thing that Wyoming statute does right, and we do have some things that are right there, and is the statute requires, if someone doesn't vote across an entire election cycle, it requires them to be removed from the voter rolls. Now, I'm a trust but verify guy. So one of the things I want to do in the Secretary of State's office is make sure the clerks are following it, because I have seen state government violate state statute so many times. They are the biggest violator of state statutes, and sometimes they come to the legislature and brag about it. They say, okay, well, we want this fixed, we're not following it anyway, so now we want you to change it because we're not following it. Imagine if that were a private citizen. So the statute is pretty clean. And I don't take any ideas if there's anything more we can do, but having it cleaned every cycle if someone doesn't vote, that's one of the most stringent in the nation. Now, is that happening? That's the question, I think. And if anyone has any ideas on how to make it more stringent, I'm open to them. Now, then you get into the second part of your question, which is voter impersonation. And I'll give you an example of that I've seen in my own races where I'm not sure what is in state statute is being followed. I had somebody that was in my district, had requested an absentee ballot, and one thing that I do not think the statute allows that the clerks do is they allow people to, in the primary, request an absentee, and then say, well, I want one for the general too. To me, those two things should probably be bifurcated. Now, I've gotten into this debate with the clerks in the past on the voter ID bill. Actually, it was when we debated this on whether the statute allows that or not. They feel it does. But I had a constituent, I've been a state legislator for 6 years, who passed away in between the primary and the general, and she always voted absentee. And I saw her on the list. She passed away. I saw it in the paper. And, sad situation. But I saw her name on the absentee list because she had requested one in the primary for the general. So I called in the clerk and I said, you guys might want to look at this. There's an individual who's passed away. It's very clear. It's been reported in the Red Star Tribune, Pravda on the Platte, and it's been reported in the fake news media, but it is, in the obituary. That's the one part where probably there isn't bias. And so should we remove them from the rolls? I mean, I think we want to make sure we don't have a floating absentee ballot. Somebody could get that list and just remove the ballot. And they said, well, we have to wait for, we remove those with the Department of Health records when those come in. It never got removed. They refused to remove it. I guess the Department of Health death record never came in. The ballot, I do not think ever got returned. But that's an example of where I don't want to assume that what state statute says and what the practice has been, that's going to be followed. And I'm not. So the answer to your question is that the state statute, I think, is pretty good. Is it actually being followed? Is it actually being done correctly? That's another question. So
I'm just going to slip in here and help Chuck just a little bit.
yeah. Do you think I need it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Just for the heart of it.
Okay. The other thing too on voter impersonation, that was one of the big reasons I wanted to do voter ID, was because people could show up at the polls and not have, there was nothing to indicate that you were who you said you were. Nothing. So anybody can get the voter list, anybody. So you look at that and say, well, this person is not usually with it. They're probably not going to show up and vote. And you show up and say, hey, I'm this person. And they had to give you a ballot. Had to. So the predicate in your question was one of the big things of what motivated me to do the voter ID bill and work on that. So, thank you.
And then what is your position on the machine?
On the machines, I'm a Trust But Verify guy. And I want to do that hand audit everywhere. And I want to have a hand audit of the entire account, period. The Park County, and I'll tell you, this is the one, I've talked to the Clerks Association, they're going to push back on this heavily. But I'm not afraid, they pushed back on voter ID. And then finally they came around after 3 years of fighting it, and then they finally called me, because I started going on radio shows talking about how they weren't following what their constituents wanted. And that's when they get scared. When they see that people are starting to say, look, are they doing the right thing? Maybe we shouldn't support this person anymore. So they're pushing back on that one a little bit. I've talked to them, but that's okay. I've dealt with that before. And by the way, my opponent, and she'll do it tomorrow night. We got a debate on PBS, or it's going to be streamed on YouTube. And it's going to be an interesting one. If you haven't seen our debates on Facebook, they get pretty interesting, pretty quick. So she says, well, that I'm impugning the 23 county clerks by wanting to improve our elections. It's absurd. As if somebody who wants to get paid $125,000, if anybody runs and say there's any improvements in our election system, that's impugning their integrity. That's how absurd it is. But the Park County Republican Men's Group, who did a great meeting with a couple months ago, they had a whole process in place on how they were going to get this hand audit done in one night. That's the way France and the UK does it. And the county clerks, the county commissioners hid behind this faulty interpretation of state statute when the Constitution clearly says that the election is to be done by ballot, in other words, allowing the count. They hid behind this faulty statute saying somehow that a hand count wouldn't be allowed. That's how absurd some of these people are. And they hid behind that and said no. And I'm telling you, I am going to do all I can. One, I'm going to, current Secretary of State stood by that interpretation of state statute. That's not my interpretation of it. And we're going to set up those handouts. We're going to be sort of the centerpiece of that grassroots movement. And we're going to need patriots like you who are here on a Sunday evening. I'm going to need you. Our state's going to need you, to be more precise. Our country's going to need you. We're going to need volunteers around our state to get this done. Because I can tell you what the legislature is going to do. One, they're going to call us conspiracy theorists. Two, they're going to say it's a waste of money. So we're going to need a lot of people who are willing to do it for free. I'm not saying there will be zero cost, but we do need to keep the cost minimal. And three, they're going to say it can't be done. Which it can. So my position on the machines is that they're real questions. And ES&S, Ed Buchanan's been criticizing me because I never went to one of their dog and pony shows. They could tell me whatever. I still would say it needs to be verified.
Yes.
I don't care what they could, pull out a modem, pull out like a magician, a bird out of the hat or whatever. It doesn't matter. This is central to our republic elections.
Yeah.
Everything's central to the business I help in, radio. We have backups on. We have backup generators on our transmitters, et cetera, et cetera. This is the most central thing to our republic. We cannot all put it on a USB port and trust a couple people in who knows where. So we have to have that confidence in our elections, and how do we do it? We have to verify the machine count and ensure that it's correct. So, thank you.
So I just want to open it up for people's questions. I'll kind of bring the mic back and forth, but any questions and things that people here want to discuss? I think let's give you a chance.
Hey Chuck,
Yes.
I'm not sure what would have prevented this, but I personally know somebody right here in this county who went to go vote in person, and they said, oh, no, you can't vote. You asked for an absentee ballot. You've already had your chance. To which he said, no, I've never requested an absentee ballot in my life. It did not happen. He did not get to cast his vote. He had his ID. So what prevents that kind of a situation? Or how do we solve that for the future?
The answer is nothing.
Yeah.
And this keeps me up at night. I mean, the fact that it keeps me up at night. The way it works is once you have a registration, you can call in and ask for an absentee ballot. And I will say one of the flaws in the voter ID bill, I never said it was perfect. People have attacked me. Well, it was a 5-yard pass, 7-yard pass. There's a lot of situations where you get that in the legislature. There's too many rhinos there. All of our bills get amended down. All of them. So then you face a third reading bill and it's, look, do you take the 5-yard pass or do you take nothing? And I can tell you that this voter ID bill had been tried 16 times in 20 years. One of the reasons that we turned it around was the persistence of grassroots people like you in this room, Carolyn, and the 2020 election. They knew if they voted down something as simple as voter ID after that, they would not be coming back because a couple of them have lost their re-elections on the issue. So look, do we take a 6-7 yard pass, maybe a 5-yard pass or nothing? I decided to take it. But one of the flaws is that the absentee ballots do not require voter ID, and I think that's the big fix, is that you require, and states do this, and there is a consequence there. If someone forgets, then they either have to come in, it becomes a provisional ballot, they have to come in and confirm it, they call you, they notify you, and if you don't, that ballot, it doesn't count. And so, that's part of getting it right. And so, unfortunately, AARP stopped that element from coming in the bill, but I think voter ID on absentee ballots is the big fix there. And I'm open to other suggestions, but I think that's the big one on that particular issue. But yes, there's really nothing stopping that. Voter impersonation over absentee would, frankly, and this is part of the flaw of the bill. It'd be easier over an absentee ballot than it would be in person. And so.
Any other questions?
Just a quick note, I believe you could use discrimination in a court case. I have to have an ID in order to vote in person. Why is that not discriminating to allow someone to vote without an ID?
I will say that is one of the arguments the Democrats are making because they're trying to get the voter ID enjoined. And I will protect that voter ID law. It is circular, right? Because the Democrats fought that from ever going in the bill, and then they complain about it. That's the way they operate. They are a very dishonest bunch, that coalition of the insiders, the Democrats, and the media. And they don't like me because I hold them accountable. That's why I'm their number one target. I mean, we can get into what's happened the last 4 days at some point, if it's okay. But let's take a couple more questions. But they are using that, and
this kind of goes back to the absentee ballot request
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
These went
Oh,
out
yeah.
all over the state of Wyoming.
Yeah.
And it's very upsetting because of how official looking it is, coming from, looks like it comes from the state. And at first glance, I didn't even notice what was in the upper right corner. But when I called down to the Secretary of State's office, they said it is completely legal for someone to do this. Basically, they just got it off of the website, this image off of the website, and printed it up and sent it off. And to me, yes, absolutely. To me, it's just so misleading and misrepresentative. I was livid. And I don't know that many people caught that the paid for by Liz Cheney is up in the upper right corner and would just assume it came from the state and its official document.
I got one too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I don't know
I've
what
gotten
my
a lot of
question is
questions.
there, but it's
Yeah.
just, it's very frustrating to me that that is a legal thing for a candidate to do.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions on this and been traveling pretty much every day, so I haven't had a chance to go through my mail. So I've been asking, the reason why I asked for it is wanting someone to give me this side. The part that I think there's a number of, part of why I'm needed as Secretary of State. I'm getting tired of people's complaints not being heard. Right now you have sort of the status quo element. I'll tell you, you got Tara Nethercott saying no changes are needed. Well, imagine her on complaints. You will get nothing. Now, I am someone that is not just there to use this as, I'm not using this as a stepping stone. She wants to be governor of the state of Wyoming. This is the Secretary of State is the lieutenant governor of the state. They serve in the event of a vacancy as governor, or if the governor is out of state. And I'll tell you, if Tara Nethercott wins this race, some may disagree with me, there's probably a 70 to 75% chance she's the next governor of Wyoming. I don't say that gleefully, but if you look at the conservative movement, one, who do we unite around? You know, maybe Harriet comes home, but maybe that's probably the only one. It will be very difficult, and she's trying to use this as a stepping stone. So I can tell you, complaints are going to go nowhere, because the easiest way to make enemies is to respond to complaints, but I'm not afraid of that. I never have been. So there's a couple things that I think are problematic about this. The big one, and I wanted to I was trying to get someone to send me the outer edge of this, and I couldn't get it. So this confirms it. This to me is impersonation of a public official.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that is, you know, you can get to the official form, and I want to review the statute a little bit more on impersonating an official form and the intent, because this is malicious intent here. But to me, this is the smoking gun right here. This is impersonating a public official, and that is a felony. So I think it's pretty simple. So that's my answer to it. I can tell you, if I were Secretary of State, there would be a vigorous response.
When you do get your mail and look at that, pay attention to the outer envelope
Yes.
and how official it looks.
Do you have one?
Well, I didn't have it. Okay.
Brian Miller has a bunch of them, we've been turning them.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got it outside.
Brian Miller.
Yeah, Brian.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me without that?
Yeah.
In the last couple of days, there was a mailer that came to probably every Sheridan County residence that was put out by some undisclosed entity calling themselves the Wyoming.
Is it this one?
It's that one,
Yeah.
right there. That needs to be looked into. Whoever did that is not disclosing who they are. They are not a PAC registered with the Secretary of State. They're attacking 4 people in our PAC, Wyoming is Right, who
Aren't even running.
aren't even running. And the PAC hasn't said anything deleterious about anybody in any way, shape, or form. All we're doing is saying who aligns with our principles and philosophies. And you happen to be on one of our vetted conservatives on our Wyoming is Right. But they're attacking Jeff Holsinger, Lori Bratton, Kristen Jennings, and Jimmy Lee Dee. I mean, give me a break. I mean, it's horrible.
And Jimmy D has actually lived in Wyoming 38
Yeah,
years.
most of her life.
I mean,
Suffering from cancer, I mean,
Yeah.
nicest person you could ever
Right.
meet.
nice,
And
yeah.
gets this kind of treatment. I mean, for one, this is disgusting.
Yeah.
This is disgusting.
It is.
And
Find out who that is.
it should be, they're identifying themselves on their paid for as a PAC, which would be legitimate if it were registered,
Right.
and it is not. And so that is a clear violation. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening here in the last few days. I think that's a good segue. Is that okay?
I'm going to answer that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The company putting that out is out of Colorado.
Yeah.
And we are not the only state. It's been going out in 5 western states right now with all different candidates, all the same thing. Basically, the bottom line is they are against anybody who's pro-Second Amendment.
Speaking on people who aren't even running for an office. What is
I mean, first of all, they're not very intelligent, the insiders, so maybe they don't know. The second reason is intimidation. They go after people that are in their way, but it could also be that they're just clueless. I mean, frankly, this is so pathetic the way it's written. I mean, like if you were actually going to do it's so nasty and so I don't think these people are very intelligent either. So
And they be prosecuted for what they just did, because that's an illegal
Yes.
use of the PAC.
Yes.
I did call Dana about it, and she, I believe said, did she say it's already been reported to the Secretary of State, not that he'll do it, nothing.
No, we need to get to the bottom.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
It's actually,
Thank you. Okay, I just had a question on House Bill 52.
House Bill 52.
There was the absentee ballot counting procedure by the
Oh,
county
yeah.
clerk.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
So,
talk about that.
right now, the county clerk would be able to set up a procedure to prepare the absentee ballots for counting prior to election day. So that gives them a window of time to get a pre-count of the turnout for Republicans, which gives, of course, the other side a chance to gather enough fake ballots to overcome outcomes. Number one. Number two is the Secretary of State is supposed to be notified by the county clerk that they are going to choose to do that. And my question was, the county clerk then has to notify each candidate of the time, each political party of the date, time, and place that absentee ballot preparation and processing will occur. The notice shall include information on in-person observation of the process, including any procedures regarding the observation.
Can't hear you very well.
Okay, I'm sorry. The county clerk shall notify each political party of the date, time, and place that absentee ballot preparation and processing will occur. The notice shall include information on in-person observation of the process, including any procedures regarding the observation. So our question was, are those uniform in terms of process procedure for every county? And what was my and who's designing those procedures? is it the Secretary of State now telling the counties how to essentially keep out observers?
Well, I just got a call on this yesterday, or 2 days ago, I was on the barge. It's pretty clear when you read that statute. First of all, I was very opposed to this statute. I voted against it and vigorously debated against it on the floor. And I remember this very well, we were one vote away from stopping it on introduction over in the House. And there are a couple people that are conservative allies that voted wrongly on that, and I was not happy that night. We could have stopped this. In answer to your question, though, and I'll get back to the bill in a moment, I do not think that the Secretary of State is really doing much on giving a uniform process to the clerks. I got a call from Biffy Jackson, who leads in Uinta County, the party there, and the clerk is refusing to let in the county party, which is more conservative. And instead, they've decided to designate their own Republicans that they're going to allow in, and they're going to notify of the process pursuant to state statute. And the statute is pretty clear. It is the political parties, which it's pretty clear who is the lead of the political parties. That is Biffy Jackson and the board of the Uinta County Republican Party. So there's another reason why, I could fix this, we can fix this pretty quickly. But that element of the statute, which I do not think is being followed right. In terms of the bill itself is so wrong. To count those absentee ballots ahead of time and to have them floating, I'm worried about the count being, people are worried about the count being leaked just because they wanted to maintain the secrecy. I'm worried about that, but your angle is the key element there, that they know how many they need. And then also, another thing that really worries me is that the ballots are just floating. They're going to be down there, and the clerk tells me, well, they're under lock and key and surveillance. I hear that every time, lock and key and surveillance. And then they show me on their cell phone, the clerks, they go, oh, well, it pings me every time there's motion. I was like, so it's a ring? Are we going to maybe use something a little bit more vigorous than that? So anyway, and by the way, Nethercott was the lead on the Senate side on that bill. And I really became the lead on the House side. The leadership was all in on it. So if you go back to that debate, I was up there a lot speaking against it. And frankly, the most upset I was, and I do sometimes have moments where Mark's here now. Mark will remember, when that thing passed on introduction, that bill, there were a couple, Mark voted no, as he's solid. Mark is my best friend. He's too many best friends with people to say that about me, because he's everybody's best friend in the conservative movement. And so I say that about him. He means a ton to me, and I want you to know that, Mark. No matter what happens 9 days from now, how much you mean to me. It has been a pleasure serving with you in the state legislature. And I have to say, I didn't get to give an introduction when Ed Buchanan dropped out about 75 days ago. My biggest thing was I just wanted to serve with Mark a little more, and I do think he has a very high chance of becoming the next Speaker of the House. And anyway, let's give a round of applause for Mark. Any more questions? Yeah.
You said that y'all needed people grassroots as far as volunteers and things like that. Where and how can we get involved, and what would be most beneficial for people running or strong conservatives that are running? How can ordinary individuals like myself get involved to help you the most?
Thanks. Well, we're 9 days out. Or was it 8? I think it's 9 days. Thanks for that question. So there's a couple things. We've got flyers here. I know, I think at the office they ran out, so I can send more I think Judy has a few more. I'm running low, but we're gonna print some more tomorrow. So if you take some flyers, get the word out. Those yard signs, if you don't have one yet, they really make a difference.
Yes.
They really do. And it's an easy thing to do. They're right out there. If you have a spot for a big sign, I have 6 sitting in my vehicle. I think we have 5 left, including this one. If you don't have your pickup with you, I can either drop it by before we leave, or I can drop it by Mark's house, and I'll leave some posts. Well, I think Mark, can you get one or two more up? if someone gives a commitment. So if you could do one of those, that would mean a ton. This race, I do think it's going to be pretty darn close. I think it's going to be 5 points or under. It's going to be decided by. We have some data that we're in the lead, and the insiders know it. And about 4 days ago, I get a call from the Red Star Tribune, Prop on the Platte. I'm on my way to Newcastle, okay? I get a call at 3:30, and they knew I had a forum in Newcastle. Not great coverage out there. I get a call and then a text as I'm driving, and they say, "Have you seen a complaint filed about you?" Well, they know the answer to that. FEC complaints are sealed until they're processed because they can be abused in the way they just were, which is someone filing a defamatory, fallacious complaint 2 weeks before the election and then illegally leaking it to the media. And that's what they did. Now, I want to tell you the whole story behind this. Last year, I was disgusted by what Liz Cheney did. And I got into a federal congressional election to run against Liz Cheney. And I followed through on my word. I met with President Trump, sitting this distance that Carolyn and I are standing from each other. We were close. I think we were the second choice, but we didn't quite get it done. And I endorsed Harriet. I support Harriet. And now President Trump, in case you haven't heard, he endorsed our campaign on Friday. Thank you to President Trump for doing that. But anyway, my grandfather, who was 94 years old, passed away. And a couple of their assets were sold off. And some of those funds were transferred to me. And I can spend that money however I like. And I decided to put a portion of that into my congressional campaign. There's nothing wrong with that. And it was reported correctly. Those were my funds, which is what the report said. There's no straw donations from any family members. Those were my funds that were businesses, some of which I helped to grow, because I'm partners in all my family's businesses, unlike my opponent who's a lawyer, corporate attorney. They don't want anybody in business to ever go into politics. And they definitely don't want someone who isn't Bob. And they don't like someone who can play a huge role in funding their own campaigns. And by the way, if you can help our campaign, it would mean a ton, because my funds are not limitless. And at the end, we've got a lot of expenses. So nothing was done wrong. The reporting was correct. I ran that by the FEC folks, my personal disclosure reporting on my personal finances. There was nothing to report because the account didn't exist anymore. I put funds into my congressional account. So those aren't titled to me anymore. It's in my campaign, okay? Everything was done correctly. It's been confirmed. But this Max Maxfield, who doesn't like me because I'm for term limits, and he was the guy that undid the term limits statute, which was passed by 75% of voters in 1991. Anyway, it's a long story, but the insiders and the Nethercott supporters got him to file this defamatory complaint with no evidence, and then they illegally leak it to the media, and then the media calls me and says, "Have you seen it?" They know I have it, and says, "Hey, you've got 20 minutes to respond." That's what happened last Tuesday. They know we're ahead, and they're throwing everything they can at the wall. This afternoon, we personally delivered retraction notes to Ms. Nethercott and to Mr. Maxfield. and also sent those to the reporter and the editor there, which is the first step in beginning a defamation lawsuit. We're going to give them an opportunity to do the right thing here, which is what I want to do. But they know that I can't be bought. They've been around me. They know I can't be bought. I've been in the legislature 6 years. Those SLID dollars, statewide electeds sit on the SLID board. The insiders, love to use those SLID dollars for their own pet projects. And what does that do? It crowds out infrastructure. It crowds out the firehouses out here in rural Sheridan County. And they want those dollars, those lobbyists. That's how they make their money. And they know I'm no bueno on that stuff. Okay? They know that. When they tried to purchase a sixth of Wyoming in a dishonest way, I'm the one that a whistleblower called me in the state land office, and they always call me. They go, hey Chuck, you need to request this contract with JP Morgan, 7-figure contract to provide advice on the sale of a sixth of Wyoming they wanted to buy. And JP Morgan has a conflict on the transaction. So I request this contract. I put it out there. No dishonest leak. I just put it on my Facebook. I don't hide. And then I get threatening calls from a number of people in the executive branch saying I broke the law, which was totally wrong. I did nothing wrong. They had nothing on me. But basically they're trying to intimidate me. Okay? They know. If I get on SLID, there's going to be transparency. We're not going to be giving these dollars for picking winners and losers, picking politically connected individuals. And if it happens, I'm going to talk about it. That's why they don't want me on there. That's why Tara's getting all these endorsements from all these big money lobbying organizations. And that's why they're going after me here in the last days of this campaign. And we are going to fight back. I promise you that. So please help. Thank you. Yes.
Chuck, hey, I'm on full disclosure. I'm one of the board members for Wyoming is Right. The 4 people on that card that you guys had are being called out by some scumbag. And we have vetted all the candidates on Wyoming. Chuck is one of the candidates that we vetted. If you go to Wyoming is Right, or if you got the card, our flyer in the mail, go and look. The people that we chose, Dr. Bird, he's one, fully vetted. So it's not just him saying it. Those people that are on that card did the vetting and did a thorough job. That's a true conservative, vetted conservative. Get that out to other people. If you need to email it to people or whatever, contact us at Wyoming is Right so we can get it to you, so you can email it out to people. But we definitely don't want the other choice. We want Chuck.
Just 2 questions.
Yeah.
They're really more legislative questions, Chuck. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
I love the legislature.
Okay. 2 quick questions. One is, are we doing anything to head off ESG as the way the qualifying criteria? Are we doing anything to head that off? And the second thing is, are we doing anything to head off China buying property in Wyoming?
Land everywhere.
Yeah.
Like next to the airfield.
Well, on the first question, there's been a bill, there was last year, to ban the ESG, and it was over in the Senate. I was gonna bring it over in the House, but we have a 5-bill limit, so kind of let the senators do that one. And the Senate is generally more conservative, so I thought it had a better chance coming out of there in the House of Origin, because you need 2/3 over there. And I was working on the ban on critical race theory, which we couldn't even get 40 votes on the ban on critical race theory. And that bill did not pass in the House, in the Senate Minerals Committee, which oversees banking issues. So it wasn't, they didn't even take a vote on it. But it did pass introduction. I think there was a lot of people who were working on it. And I know there's going to be a bill filed in this next session. I guarantee you that. So watch for that bill number. But there are efforts to stop that. On the second question, sorry, what was it?
China.
China. I've
Yes,
worked
thank you. Good luck.
quite a bit on, I've worked a little bit on this issue. Very disturbed by the purchase of uranium mines by Russia. Talked about that on the floor when they authorized this nuclear plant, which I was opposed to, that's gonna be Russian uranium that is gonna be used at that. And I, as a Minerals Committee, submitted a number of times to have a study on how we could step in for the State Department, because they're doing diddly squat on stopping these asset sales of strategic assets, which they should be doing something about. That's one of their big roles. And the state should be stepping in and stopping those asset sales. And I believe there's a role to play there. Unfortunately, and I'll never forget one time it made it to the list, specifically in relation to the Uranium One issue. It was my second year in the legislature, and boy, there were some people who were involved in that transaction that were not happy about it, and they made sure that that wasn't going to be a topic for the Minerals Committee to look at. And they gave the chairman an earful, and I told them to stand up, but it didn't happen. I do think, and I toyed with starting this bill. I always think about bill drafts and things, and that was one I toyed with, is how do we inject Wyoming into the asset sale, strategic assets. I support Chip Roy's bill in the Congress to stop any land from being sold to a foreign entity in the United States. And I believe that is an action a state could take. I believe a state could pass a bill like that, and I certainly would support that kind of action. I think it's very troubling. You look at every single strategic asset, how foreign interests are hoarding those, trying to reduce our security by taking those on. So I thought a lot about that, and I think it's an important issue. Got very close to getting some action, some official act. It was actually in a letter that was written to the Management Council that the Minerals Committee wanted to study that, and then they had a motion to remove that from the approved list, and that motion passed. That was back in, I believe, 2018. So we'll cover it. Ronnie, we'll do Carolyn first, if that's okay. Thanks.
Well, I could be wrong, but I thought that Wyoming had a law that foreign entities couldn't buy land. John is gone. Anyway, it was a long time ago and I don't know the details, don't remember the details, but I thought at one point foreign entities were not allowed to buy Wyoming property. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I support the statute. That's another example. If it is on the books, why on earth is it not being followed?
Yeah.
And I'm sick of these statutes that aren't followed and the government brags about it. I mean, Mark and I were on judiciary. You'd have the judiciary come in, the judiciary, and brag about how they were not following state statute. So I certainly would concede that is possible, that there's already something on the books that is just not even being followed, so.
Or maybe it changed.
Mm-hmm.
I just.
Yeah, Ronnie.
So, I can speak to you. Hey Chuck, I understand that when all these ballots are brought in from all around the county to the courthouse to be counted, and they're put on a computer inside the courthouse that is not connected to the internet, all that data is going to be on a flash drive. I asked someone the other night, can each head of the opposing parties in Sheridan County get a shadow copy of that flash drive? And I was told that the software is probably expensive. So I think if the Democrats and the Republicans each get a copy of that flash drive, just to have it, just in case the count goes awry, then you have something to maybe stand on.
Mm-hmm. I'm supportive of that, and I am very fiscally conservative. Mark will confirm that, but I'm willing to spend money on stuff that's really important.
Yes.
And to me, elections are the central piece of our republic. So I remember back with Roy Edwards, I mean, we talked a lot about this, and couple of appropriations relating to our elections and how that was necessary for us to expend those funds. And I think I am going to, it's going to take some funds to get it right, and I'm not afraid of that. So
That should be cheap. Thumb drives, you get them at Walmart.
yeah, I don't, it amazes me how government can just be outrageous with spending. So one thing you're getting with me, you're getting common sense. I mean, I'm gonna go in there and nail this stuff down because the numbers that come back are just outrageous, and you just need someone to say, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
That, and then they back down. So.
I just wanted to make a quick point on the election audit policy that's come out. Okay, so I took a look at the election audit policy, and I have serious concerns about it. I think it's going to be used to cover up the rigged election. It's going to be an audit that's already predetermined. Because every step of the way, there's either a machine involved or there's coordination between the Secretary of State and the county. So I just wondered, first of all, do you have any comment on that? Do you have any concerns about it? Because I'll just give you an example. It doesn't address the machine issue. And what Ronnie was talking about earlier is by the time it gets on the flash drive, the software and the programs already manipulated the votes. So it's the software that's in the program, in addition to having possible internet access, where they can manipulate the vote. The software is not and does not need to be technical. All it's doing is looking at a bubble and marking a count for a candidate. It doesn't have to have all these bells and whistles in there. And they've made it so complicated that they can easily manipulate the votes. So it never addresses the machine issue. It's supposed to audit the machines. But if the machines are so safe, why do we need to audit the machines and spend all of this money to audit the machines when we could do a paper, in-person, hand count, day of election at the precinct level?
Yes.
That's the quickest, easiest way, cheapest way to get a ton of volunteers who would do it.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point out to you that they're going to try and say, oh, it's all safe and fine, look, we did an audit. The audit's going to be rigged. The other issue that I saw was they're going to pay University of Wyoming to prepare a model to choose random numbers of ballots to then audit. So who's paying University of Wyoming? And what is their predetermined outcome going to be? Because they're going to be paid to come out with a model that will do whoever paid them do their bidding. So that's another issue that I have about it. And the last part is basically the coordination between the Secretary of State and the county is by these spreadsheets using Microsoft. I don't even need to say more about Microsoft Excel. It's horrible. It can easily be manipulated. You can easily put in target markers in there where they know the ballots that they're supposed to pull out and audit because they've been pre-chosen. And when they provide the clerk provides the Excel spreadsheet to the Secretary of State's office, there needs to be a login record maintained at all times. Who accessed that machine and from where? Because if they're accessing it remotely, or you have some kind of a plant that's accessing the machine after the count and manipulating the votes, those have to be within the review process. But there is no observation by any average citizen in that whole audit process, none. So the Secretary of State's office could manipulate the vote and ruin your campaign. And you can't do anything about it because they'll say, we audited the machine. So I have serious concerns about the election audit policy. I just wanted to let you know that it's troublesome. And be careful.
Well, it keeps me up at night after all this work. Some dude with a keystroke could. But let's be positive. If I get there, and yes, ultimately God's will be done, and Andy was right on that. I think that you're absolutely right. I get there. I toured the Arizona audit as part of the congressional run. And I'll never forget, I was asking a lot of questions. And I did ask the Cyber Ninjas guys, I asked, how about a random audit of a portion of the count? Because I was thinking about things like this, the direction they ended up going. They really made a strong case on why that's not adequate. And so I'm with you. You really need, the state is a collection of 23 different county races, the statewide race, that's what it is. And then you have each county. So you really need, for a statewide audit, you need a full audit of all 23 counties, of the ballots. Not of what a machine prints out, not just plugging the USB back in, not running the ballots back through the machine. You need a hand count of the paper ballots. So I'm with you. I've thought a lot about it, and I talked with Ed about it. I mean, I was in Ed's office 5 months ago, and he got all riled. I wanted to set up this meeting with Patty Junick, and I think you were involved with that. And so we're trying to set up this meeting, and he got kind of emotional. He's had this thing recently where he just gets super emotional when someone starts asking. I mean, this is the job, is to address these concerns. And it was really interesting and troubling. And so I asked him about, he presented this audit to me, and I said, you really need one of the complete counts. So I'm aware of that partial audit they're doing. I agree with you, it is not adequate. It really doesn't answer the questions. It's sort of, we need to be careful, right? And I know everyone in this room is on board with that. Anyone can slap the word audit on anything, and that's become the favorite thing to do now. And it's what the insiders do. They slap the word that is the buzzword and say, well, that's adequate. We did what you wanted. And then you look at it, it's nothing like what we want. So thought a lot about that issue, and I agree.
And the money's coming from Bill Gates and China and Biden for the colleges. They've made numerous millions of donations to the college, and it all is based on the nuclear stuff. And that's where the colleges get this money to do this for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Chuck. I want to say that you mentioned something earlier about volunteers. I would gleefully use my vacation time to volunteer, to do audits.
Same.
And I think, there are other people in the room that would agree with me on that. My question for you is, one of the things that I realized when we were starting our candidacy race, when we received the voter registration from the secretary, for the county clerk's office, that there were quite a few errors in it. People had moved and their addresses hadn't been updated and so on and so forth. And I would assume that there's already legislation in place that says that the county clerks are in charge of and supposed to update their roles on a regular basis. But I think it puts some of us kind of at a bind. And I was wondering, is there a way to make that more robust so that there's some teeth to it, so that they can get that updated and get a bit more accurate for those of us who want to get that information?
Well, and I think it relates a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, which is the statute is actually a pretty strong statute, which says there's a purge after every single cycle. If you don't vote across that cycle, you are to be purged. Whether that matches reality, and I'm that kind of guy. I don't just say, well, the statute, try to say, so I was talking anecdotally earlier about that person who had passed away, unfortunately, that was not removed from the list. I want to match up reality with what the statute says and ensure that that is being followed at the county level. In terms of people moving, when people go to the polls, they're asked, have you moved? And that is one thing. How we can match that up with records and maintain also privacy to make sure that that has been done. Because if someone has moved, presumably it could be to a different precinct, entirely different house district, to an entirely different ballot. So that's very important. And I think there was one other thing I wanted to say on that. but I'm not remembering. Maybe if you had a follow-up.
To refine my question a little bit,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, as Secretary of State, would you have the power or the authority to look into those situations and maybe bring some uniformity between the counties, and maybe you need to check at given intervals so that it
Yes.
can be brought up to speed on a more regular basis?
And the statute's pretty clear on this. That's really the big part of the oversight role of the Secretary of State over elections, is maintaining that uniformity. It is a state statute, and that is that role, what they're supposed to be doing, but it has been lost, unfortunately, I think. And that's something I want to bring back to this role. And it's really the predicate behind our whole election integrity agenda, at least the first 3 to 4 points of it. So.
Well, the push behind that then is, what teeth do you have if you have a rogue clerk office?
I can issue a rule via that power, an interpretation via that power. I could get sued by one of those clerks. But I have that power, and if they don't comply, that could be turned over to the AG, and then I think, then the question is, will the AG be lawless? But
Thank you.
the power is through that rule and interpretation of that state statute, and then if they are not forced. Oh, the other thing, that's what I wanted to say. I haven't talked about this, and I am a less government guy, but one of the things I want to do is create an election integrity division within the office. And I think it's probably 1 to 2 positions. And I think you could do it savings in the other divisions and move it over so it's not a growth in government. But you see the media all the time saying, well, what are the cases of fraud? What are the cases of fraud? Well, first of all, we had that tomorrow night, that's going to be my answer. One of my answers. You just have that. I'm going to mention that PAC. It's all over the place.
Yes.
Second of all, you have DAs and the AG that doesn't really want to take action on these. I think there are political reasons for that. I think there are workload reasons. So what I think part of the role of the Secretary of State's office, what I hope to bring into that, is to investigate some of those there, and either have the ability, and this would require a statute, to bring those prosecutions, or to bring light to it, to where the pressure is there for the local DAs and maybe even the AG to bring those prosecutions. And I'll tell you, if there's a press release with evidence of voter fraud, they're going to have a tough time ignoring them. So that's one of the things that I want to do in the Secretary of State's office as well, and I think it fits a little bit into your question. I want to make sure to get that. One thing I wanted to say too, I forgot to mention this. People ask, what can they do to help? And this is not fun, but I never ask people to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So I got into this when I was in the state legislature on election day. I stand, and sometimes people say, Chuck, you gotta control yourself, don't do it. It doesn't make you look good, you look desperate. But I stand on the most busy part of town with a 4x8 and wave to people, okay, and say, hey, I'm here for you, I care. So this is a statewide race. So if someone is willing to do this at the busiest intersection, I'm trying to get people together, have one person down in Cheyenne, I have to convince them. They said they want to wear a costume so they're not seen. So I have to buy them a costume. But if there is someone or a couple of people that are willing to do this in the busiest intersections of Sheridan, with 9 days out, that is actually probably one of the biggest things you could do. And so I'm willing to leave a 4x8 or more, you know.
I got it.
You're going to do it?
I got it.
Ryan.
I go to Starbucks.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Yes, Alfred.
Chuck, this is really based on your legislative experience, but I have sent emails, for example, to the treasurer's office, and I would be cautious. Don't put anything in that email that you don't want to have the public be able to see. Now my question is, can the state make a big contract with a company and keep that contract secret? Or is there law or whatever that would require that those things to be available to the public?
Well, you know, there are all sorts of provisions in the public meetings laws which allow some of those to be sealed. I am not a fan of that. The only time where is maybe in a transaction or you want to be able to negotiate. But like the JP Morgan thing, that was not an appropriate use. That was hiding a contract that one had already been executed, that was for consulting advice. It didn't have anything to do with the transaction itself, and in which there was a conflict. That was a totally inappropriate use of that power to seal a contract. What it really is for is situations where being able to have access to that could affect the actual transaction in place and yield a higher bid amount, which ultimately hurts the taxpayer. So that's why that's there, where they can seal certain contracts, but it is not those sorts of situations. And the abuse of that is something that I will not allow on the slip board. And yeah, I'm only one vote on there, but there are things that I can do to make sure that's why they don't want me there. So that's why we need good people in these positions, because there is room given in state statute for some of these exigent circumstances, and unfortunately, the insiders abuse them. So,
I'm thinking specifically about who is the sole custodian of our $25 billion, and you know who it is. But is there grounds legally for that not to be disclosed by the state auditor or by any of the other officers?
my answer immediately would be no. I want to study the issue more, but we've talked a lot about that, and I think that is, and especially with what the risk is there, that is not an appropriate use, and that would be my response to that, my gut response. Well, I think we're kind of.
Chuck?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Can I speak for a minute?
Yes.
Chuck's offered this to me several times, and I don't think I've ever taken yet, so you might want to record this. So I want to change this direction of this just a little, and I want to speak to character. Character really matters. Integrity matters, and it is a paramount. And I want to take you to Chuck's opponent. So my very first year in, I ran a bill called Parental Rights. And that bill was, most of you think that you have kids, you think you have the fundamental right to raise your kids, don't you?
Yes, sir.
But it's not spelled out in the U.S. Constitution. The Wyoming Constitution wasn't in statute. And so in Wyoming, I was in 2 years before Chuck was. Chuck and Tara came in the same year. So I had problems with the president on the Senate side, and he said, you want parents to have the right to raise their kids, then they have to take a test and prove that they're good parents. And I said, well, I'm not putting that in the bill, and so he just put it in the drawer. So the third year, new president, and I actually ran that bill again, and probably the number one person to fight me on that was Tara Nethercott. Without a question mark. That she was, and I want to speak to the character, because this is, you guys are going to go out and talk to people and help Chuck out in this, because Chuck is a man of integrity. And so she fought me on that for a full year, and we won. And today, your parental rights are statutorily protected as a fundamental God-given right. Now let me tell you what Tara Nethercott did next. She ran a bill as the prime sponsor that was called de facto custodian. And what it said was that if you're, one of the things that it said in there was, if you are a daycare keeper and you spend more time with that child than the parent does, you would have the right under her law to sue for the rights of taking that child away from the parent. Now that, I mean, think about that for a minute. That ought to throw the chills down your back. And I fought with Tara over that for 3 years.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And it was very vicious. And I'm telling you, you do not want somebody with that type of character in this job. This is a very important job, and you want a man of integrity or a woman of integrity, but Tara is not that. I've served with Chuck for 6 years. I've not seen the lapse of integrity. You'd think in 6 years, if it was there, I'd have run across it. I consider Chuck one of my best friends. One of them. I have watched him get beat down time and again. Probably no one has called for more ayes and nays than Chuck Gray so that you could have the information. But I'm running second on that race. And I'm telling you that integrity does matter in who you send to these offices. And I'm telling you, Chuck is the real deal. He's real integrity. I'd ask you to support him all you could.
I'll tell you about Mark. I was talking about him earlier, but when I call for those recorded votes, he's the only person who, like, if I did that, that was when Steve Harshman called me the F word. Not that I've been called nastier, but it shows they call us nasty, and they are the nasty ones, and that's why I bring that up. But Mark is one of the only people you really learn about people on that recorded vote thing, because most people do not want to do it. You get hated pretty quick. One time I did it 8 times in a row on the budget. I showed up one day, I was, every single decrease is a voice vote, which is ridiculous because 30% of the people participate and you can't tell. It's all basically one person, which is the speaker, deciding what to do. So I showed up one day, I said, I'm tired of this. I'm going to call every single one, every decrease for recorded vote. 8 times in a row, because I was the only one. I was bringing 8. I brought like 9 or 10 decrease amendments. And I kept doing it. And Dan Zwanitzer recorded a formal protest in the Journal that day for me asking him to do his job and go on the record. That's how nasty they are. And then when I did it in the special session, that's when Steve Harshman went on it. But we really, once again, saw his true colors. But Mark, for one, when you call for a recorded vote, you need a second in the House. And he's the only one I can rely on, one, to follow through on it, do it at the right time, and not complain. And 2, I've asked him numerous times, can you do this one? And he does it. And he's just an incredible person. And I really think he's got a very good chance of being Speaker of the House. And it's an important thing in our state that he is. I do think this election, we talk about runoffs a lot. We really do have a runoff in this race, basically. There's going to be 4 people on your ballot. Doug Stetter dropped out. He's the Senate president. The insiders got him to endorse Nethercott because they realized in June we were in the lead. We are in the lead, although I think it's pretty close right now. So he's going to be on your ballot. He's out. Then you've got Mark Armstrong, who really isn't campaigning, not doing anything. You have a clear choice in this race between myself, who's been in the legislature since 2017, clear conservative record. CPAC's awarded every year for my voting record an award. WyoVote.com, which rates every single vote from the last session, over 600. I was rated the most conservative. Sorry, Mark, you were
just barely.
Just barely. It was a little amount. And then Wyoming Right to Life was the lead on the ultrasound bill, the first pro-life bill in 30 years. It worked on a lot of issues. So I just bring that up because there's a track record there. Meanwhile, my opponent, she voted against the bill to ban men from participating in women's sports.
Yes.
We tried to ban that. She voted against
Yes.
it with the Democrats and a couple of these people with R's after their name that claim to be Republicans but are total Democrats. She voted against that. That's how liberal she is. I just bring that up. And one thing too, that mailer earlier, that's nasty, what they did. I've had a couple mailers where I talk about a record. I'm sorry, you have an oath and you are responsible for that record. And they try to compare what they do, their nastiness, making stuff up, accusing me for all this wrongdoing. Every single race I've run, I get 40, 50 calls from people about my opponent on their personal lives, things they've done in business, whatever, I tell them every time, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not that kind of guy. I focus on the records. And that is not nasty at all. And I stand by those mailers. Now those ones and what they're doing to me, that is nasty. It's not substantive at all. It's made up. Every single one of those votes is online. And people were responsible for the records. And I'm sorry, the media isn't going to bring it out. They aren't going to do it. So it is important for us to talk about those records. And there is nothing nasty about that. To talk about people and what they've done as legislators, what they've done in office. And I stand by that. So, anyway.
You're here.
And one thing too, the reason they go down this route and make things up and do these sorts of mailers is because they know they can't win on the issues.
Yes.
They know that they don't stand with the majority of Wyomingites, so they need to cross over, they need to cheat, they need to send up nasty stuff like that and make up stuff if they have nothing. So that's why they do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody here has heard enough to know that they don't want Nettercott in that office. And one of the things you can do is talk to every voter that you can and convince them with information that's been available tonight and online and every place else to vote for Chuck.
So Chuck, I want to thank you again for
Yeah,
taking the
thank you,
time
Jeff.
to meet
Thanks,
with us
Andy.
tonight. There is a box back there if you're interested in putting donations in for Chuck. You know, the money interests are aligned against him. And it is not completely discouraging. I think you watched what happened in Arizona. So, you know, every one of the MAGA candidates won there. And Carrie Lake, she had $3 million total grassroots organization, and $30 million of the establishment threw against her, and all kinds of vote shenanigans and stuff taking place. And she still won. So, you know, we can't give up. We just got to show up in numbers, get your neighbors out there, and everybody get into the fight because, like I said, the stakes are super, super high. Chuck, do you want to give everybody just maybe your campaign site, so if they want to go there for more information or donations?
Yeah, chuckforwyoming.com, Chuck in the FOR, Wyoming.com. We have ability to donate there, information. If you could take a yard sign, if you're interested in the big sign, we'll leave them. We're leaving one with Ronnie for election day. And if you're interested at all, just let me know in volunteering or anything. My cell is on the back of that. Text is best. There have been quite a few calls. So texting is the number one way if possible. And I do, Jeff reached out to me over the phone, and I do return those as well, but it takes a little longer. So texting is the number one way. 251-1372. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify two things about the machines, because we've been talking a lot about them tonight. So one is, France did decide to do away with their machines. Their elections, they just held one, I think it was about a month and a half ago. 32 million votes counted with all the results out by 8 p.m. at night, all paper ballots. So it is definitely possible. And also, it's important for people to know, so, you know, for a year and a half, we've been told with the machines that there's just no way to access them. They can't access the internet and so forth. Well, you know, CISA was at the lead of kind of saying most safe and secure elections, they can't be accessed. And recently there was a lawsuit, I believe it was in Georgia, but anyway, one of the persons that was called in as an expert witness was a guy named Professor Alderman, who's from the University of Michigan, who not only talked about machines having access to the internet, but he showed that they were hackable. He was able to do it within 5 minutes. And so CISA has had to come on and admit that, yeah, this is a huge election vulnerability with machines. And it's just important that people know it, because we've been so lied to by the media and the political establishment all along the way. So just be mindful, pass the word.
And one thing too, just want to again thank everybody, thank Jeff and Andy, Dr. Burr, Ronnie for setting this up, and again, my number is 251-1372, so I think Ronnie will.
Do I have to wait till you get elected where we can get a shadow copy of the thumb drive? Or can our, like, state committeeman or somebody, I don't know the hierarchy necessarily, somebody ask for that shadow copy. This election is important. If we don't win these elections coming up right now, we forget the rest of them. We gotta make this work. So I know I'm barking up the same tree, a shadow copy, but I just don't trust them.
I hear you, and unfortunately, I'm not the Secretary of State yet. I do think Ed is probably going to resign because he's now a judge. They give him a few weeks to go in. But my understanding is most likely he's going to resign in September. And the Central Committee, GOP Central Committee, is going to put forward 3 names to the governor. And if I'm the nominee, you would think that I have a high chance of being one of those 3 names. So I do commit to you, Ronnie. I get in there in September for the general election. We're going to work on that issue. But that's why these next 9 days are so important, because I'm not in there now. I am a state legislator, but they're not. That Secretary of State's office is not.
And we gotta make sure Sheridan County goes to Chuck Gray. That's the point I'm trying to make, Chuck. I wanna make sure this election that we're having on the 16th is gonna work.
Yeah, but the current office, and I don't want to be adversarial with them, but frankly, many of the employees there are liking my opponent's Facebook post, which I think is very inappropriate. I think, and county clerks are liking her posts, and I just view that as very inappropriate. And it decreases my confidence in some of this process. But, so, in terms of me being able to convince them to do it without getting elected, Ronnie, unfortunately in the next 9 days, I don't think I could do that. I just want to be honest with you.
Right.
But I get there, and I can promise you, you've got my number, and we're going to work on that.
And I thank you for that response.
Yeah.
I surely do, but I mean, who has the authority to request the shadow copy?
It's Ed. Well, the authority, you could, or the party, but Ed, I'm sure Brian would do it if he hasn't already, but Ed's the current one. He has committed to staying through the primary. My gut, and I don't want to speak for him, I want to be clear on this, but my gut is that he will not be staying through the general election. That is what I have heard. And so that there probably will be a new Secretary of State appointed by the governor with the 3 that the party sent. Thank you. Yes?
Just a little note about what happened in Arizona. Kerry Lake was behind on election day, and because they thought the voter turnout was very low, well, they were counting, when they first counted the absentee ballots, which of course went to the Democrat. But once they started counting same day, election day votes, she won 70% of the vote. Because all the Republicans who were worried about election integrity held their ballots and walked it in on game day. And it's the same thing that's happening in Washington right now. Joe Kent may win. He's down 257 ballots as of Friday night. They have 30,000 left. And those that they're counting, 30,000 are game day votes. So if you haven't voted, or you know somebody hasn't voted, and you get them in on election day, it can make the difference. So, good luck.
And I think that is happening. That's why Cheney sent that out. My impression is the vote early totals are actually pretty low. I mean, I've been checking more in Natrona, and just as a spot count, assuming just from a statistical perspective that one county is somewhat representative of the whole, I mean, it was 2,500. I called, I think it was Thursday, it might have been Friday, everything blurring together, which, I predict a 13,000 turnout in the primary out of Natrona. That's 8 or 9%. That's pretty low. Because usually, even pre-COVID, 25% was absentee and early, and in COVID, it was 50%. Not that we wanted to highlight that. So my impression is a lot of people are doing that. They are holding their ballots, and patriots are saying, no, we're going to do it on the day of. So I think that is happening. I think you're correct on that. That was my feeling off that data. Then again, it really speeds up the last week. There's a lot of early voting that occurs at the courthouse, and a lot of those absentees come in. But my gut is similar to yours on the count. Thank you. I'll be here too.